Did you sign off on the Q3 variants? That was the first domino. The voice came from behind her monitor, sugar slick but hollow, the kind of voice that smiles while picking out a coffin. It belonged to Shane, her director, a man who ironed his collar with the desperation of someone pretending his marriage wasn't decomposing in his Tesla. Ava blinked. The spreadsheet on her screen blurred for half a second before snapping back into perfect clarity. Numbers didn't match. Again, third time this week. I flagged a rounding error, she murmured. She didn't look up. That's how you survived in the cubicle trenches, eyes down, mouth shut, keep your conscience like a secret pet. Rounding error. Shane laughed without joy. Sure. Just remember, Ava, you're paid to keep the pipes clean, not to sniff the sewage. And then he walked away, leaving behind a trace of aftershave that smelled like expired ambition. That night, she stayed late. Again, building emptied out like a peeled orange, one floor at a time, lights shutting down like the heartbeat of something old and tired. Ava stared at the numbers. The problem wasn't rounding. It was falsification. Manual overrides, copy-paste jobs masquerading as automation. The acquisition files were the worst. Duplicated entries, identical timestamps across allegedly separate entities, asset swaps that made zero economic sense unless you were laundering balance sheet liability into fairy dust for investor calls. She wrote it all down, on paper, with a red pen. Old school, the way her dad taught her to track engine failures when she was 16 and rebuilding a rusted-out '97 Civic in their driveway. Always keep a manual backup. Computers lie if people tell them to. Her dad died 2 years ago. Liver cancer. Cheap bourbon, cheaper regrets. Still taught her the one thing corporate America forgot. Don't trust a clean story. By the time she left the building, it was close to midnight. Rain had turned the parking lot into a black mirror. Her car, a battered Corolla with a check engine light that flickered like an old cigarette ad, shuddered when she turned the key. She didn't go home right away. Instead, she drove to a 24-hour diner, slid into a cracked booth under buzzing lights, ordered the coffee no one drinks unless they've got something heavy to swallow. She stared at the numbers again on her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. She could delete the file, pretend it never happened. Plenty of people did. That's how you climb. That's how you get that corner office with the silent air conditioning and the door that locks. But her hand didn't move. The waitress came by. Need anything else, Han? Ava looked up. No, she said, just figuring out if I want to stay employed or stay honest. The woman blinked. Ain't that the same thing? Ava almost laughed. Almost. The next morning, the office smelled like ozone and fresh lies. Someone had sprayed too much Febreze in the conference room again. Her inbox was bloated with meeting requests, but not a single one included her name. People stopped making eye contact. She heard her name in half-finished sentences, always followed by silence when she stepped into a room. Someone had rifled through her desk. Her backup flash drive gone. Shane passed by around noon. By the way, he said, flashing teeth like a bored shark, next time you find something that doesn't add up, bring it to me, not HR, not audit me. She stared at him, quiet. He tapped her desk with 2 fingers. Don't dig where you're not paid to garden. And then he winked. That night, Ava wrote a letter. Not to HR, not yet. Just a note to herself, a reminder, I'm not crazy. I'm just the only one listening to the alarms. Then she printed it, folded it, put it in the back of her wallet, because things were about to break. And when they did, she needed to remember exactly when she knew. The spreadsheet bled like a crime scene. Line 243, $17.6 million in consulting fees for a company that, according to Ava's records, been legally dissolved 8 months prior. Line 244, another $2 million logged as IP valuation services by a shell corporation with no employees, no address, and no digital footprint outside of a Wix homepage that hadn't been updated since 2019. The deeper she scrolled, the more it unraveled. There were dates that didn't match, signatures from people who hadn't been in the company for years, a 73-page PDF titled Post-Merger Alignment Report that referenced asset transfers before the merger had even been signed. This wasn't just creative accounting. This was the kind of paperwork that made SEC lawyers lick their chops. She printed 2 pages and locked them in her bottom drawer. Then she spent the rest of the night lying on her back in bed, eyes wide open, watching shadows slide across her ceiling. Ceiling fan spun like it was counting down something. She remembered an ethics seminar from years back. The woman leading it had said, "Your moral compass is only as useful as your courage to follow it." Ava hadn't known back then that courage felt like dry mouth and chest cramps and the steady urge to vomit your spine. The next morning, she submitted the report through the official HR compliance channel, a portal buried behind 4 password screens, a confessional booth staffed by algorithms. She attached screenshots, cross-referenced spreadsheets, added a note at the bottom. I believe this may constitute material misrepresentation under federal law. Then she hit send. The portal gave her a 6-digit tracking number and a polite message. Thank you for helping us maintain our ethical standards. She sat there in her chair, heart beating so loud it sounded like it came from under the floor. Then she waited. 2 days later, she was summoned to HR. Not for discussion, for a wellness check. Laurie, the HR rep, smiled like she practiced in a broken mirror. We just want to make sure you're feeling supported, Ava. These long hours can be stressful. I'm fine, Ava said, because some people have noticed you seem distant. Are you sleeping okay? Eating? Ava stared at her. I submitted a report on potential financial misconduct. Has anyone reviewed it? Laurie tilted her head. Of course, all reports are routed to the appropriate internal team, and they'll be in touch if needed. Ava left that meeting with the distinct feeling you get when you realize the fire alarm is a prop. The next week, the walls started closing in. She was removed from 3 recurring meetings. One calendar invite literally disappeared while she was in the room. A Slack thread she was part of went silent mid-conversation, then rebooted 10 minutes later without her name in it. Steve from accounts, who used to bring her jelly beans on Thursdays, wouldn't meet her eyes in the break room. Someone posted a Dilbert cartoon outside her cubicle. The caption, "Some employees are more trouble than they're worth." Subtle. That Friday, Shane showed up behind her without warning. Got plans this weekend? He asked. She didn't look up. Just laundry and existential dread. Laughed like a man who didn't get the joke, but wanted credit for being in the room when it landed. Then he leaned in and whispered, sometimes the smartest thing a person can do is forget. And then he was gone. She waited until 5, packed her bag like it was laced with explosives, and left the building without saying a word. At home, she sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by manila folders, hard copies, and sticky notes. She thought about deleting the backup. She thought about buying a paper shredder. She thought about vodka. Instead, she opened a new Google Doc. Title, Contingency if they come for me first. She didn't know what came next, but she was certain the line had been crossed, and she had just lit the fuse. They called her in at 9:07 a.m. sharp. No meeting on the calendar, no email, just a notification blinking on her screen. Please report to HR immediately. The office smelled like burnt coffee and Monday panic. Ava stood slowly, instinctively straightening her blouse, smoothing her hair, like preparing for a performance she hadn't auditioned for. When she walked into the glass-walled conference room, she knew. 2 people were already seated, Laurie from HR, and some man she didn't recognize wearing a tie that screamed legal counsel. A cardboard box sat on the floor beside them, kind you get when the company decides your entire identity can fit into 12x 10 inches. Laurie gave her that same brittle smile. Ava, please have a seat. She didn't. The man spoke next, flipping through a folder like he was auctioning off her spine. Miss Riener, this is a termination meeting, effective immediately. Ava blinked. I what? He didn't pause. You're being let go for violating company values, sharing sensitive information without proper clearance, demonstrating behavior that calls into question your loyalty to the firm. She stared at them like the room had tilted sideways. I reported internal fraud, through official channels. Laurie interjected with syrupy menace. There is a difference between raising concerns and creating disruption. Ava felt her mouth move, but no sound came out. The man slid a form across the table. Here's your termination letter. You are not eligible for severance. No severance, she echoed. Voice sounded far away like it belonged to someone else. Due to the nature of the breach, HR determined it voids your package, Laurie said. Ava looked down. The letter was already signed. Not by Shane, not by the CFO, just some anonymous VP in legal. Rubber-stamped betrayal. I want a copy of the report I submitted, she said. That's internal property, the man replied. You forfeited access when your badge was deactivated. My badge. Deactivated at 9:03, Laurie chirped. Security will walk you to your desk. You'll have 10 minutes, 10 minutes. It took her 2 just to stop shaking. The walk back was a humiliation parade. Eyes followed her like she was radioactive. No one spoke. Someone closed a laptop when she passed. Her name badge wouldn't even open the elevator. She had to wait while a guard swiped her up like a criminal on parole. Her desk was already half-packed. Files gone. Personal items boxed. Even her plant looked like it had been traumatized. She found a single sticky note on her keyboard. No name, just should have kept your head down. She almost laughed, almost. Instead, she grabbed the box, held it tight, and walked out of that office with her chin high and her stomach turned to ash. Outside, the morning sun mocked her, too bright, too cheerful. The wind kicked up, flipping her skirt as if the universe wanted one last insult. Sat in her car for 20 full minutes. Didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat. The numbness crept in like fog. She watched people shuffle by, sipping their coffees, tapping their phones, unaware that the system had just eaten another soul and licked its fingers. Then the rage started to flicker. Not loud, not fiery, cold, surgical. She pulled out her phone, checked the HR portal. Access denied. Her company email was already scrubbed. It was like she never existed. Opened her wallet. Took out the folded note she'd written weeks earlier. I'm not crazy. I'm just the only one listening to the alarms. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breath slowed. That afternoon, she drove home. She didn't tell anyone, didn't post about it, didn't rant. Instead, she pulled out the USB drive, the one they never knew existed, labeled Tax Docs 2017 in shaky Sharpie. She clicked it open, watched the files populate. PDFs, emails, call logs, spreadsheets. She didn't feel heroic, didn't feel brave. She felt precise. They thought they'd cut her out. They didn't realize they'd just removed the one thing holding their empire together. The light in Ava's apartment was dim and yellow, the kind of flickering glow that made everything look like a memory. Outside, rain tapped against the window like a metronome for collapse. Inside, Ava sat barefoot on the kitchen floor, her blazer still on. ID badge tossed face down under the fridge like it had tried to escape. She hadn't eaten, couldn't. Her stomach felt like it had been replaced by a block of concrete wrapped in wire. The cardboard box sat beside her, her life in 12 cubic inches. A photo of her dad in his mechanic's coveralls. The world's okayest analyst mug from her old intern, dented on the rim. A thumbtack-stabbed post-it that read trust, but spreadsheet. And beneath all of it, folded into the crease of a copy of Sarbanes-Oxley for Dummies, was her original hiring contract. She didn't even remember why she'd kept it. Maybe because she'd always assumed, in some far-off fantasy, she might actually need to use it. She unfolded the pages slowly, reading through the usual legal garble until her eyes stopped on a highlighted clause she'd marked in pink. Years ago, employees who report regulatory violations leading to material fines may be entitled to a whistleblower share of said fines, not to exceed 5%, pursuant to relevant federal law and internal policy. 5%. Her heart didn't leap. It locked into a slow, rhythmic punch behind her ribs. She stood up. Her knees popped. Her back cracked. Then she walked into her bedroom, pulled open the bottom drawer of her dresser, reached behind the stacked sweatshirts until her fingers found it, a black SanDisk USB drive taped to the back panel. The company-issued laptop was gone, scrubbed by IT and likely melted down for parts in some legal department bonfire. But her personal MacBook still worked just fine. She clicked the drive in, watched as it opened like a haunted chest. Hundreds of files. Emails she'd BCC'd to herself, expense reports with discrepancies highlighted, meeting recordings she'd transferred from her phone, spreadsheets downloaded offline and scrubbed of trace metadata. Each one a bone in the skeleton they'd buried under 10 years of buzzwords and investor slide decks. She copied them all into a folder titled Insurance. Then she zipped it, encrypted it, and stared at the blinking cursor. What now? Google. How to file federal whistleblower tip SEC. She reread, downloaded the official forms, checked the submission process. They allowed anonymous reports, encouraged them, even, especially for cases involving fraud, deception, investor manipulation. All roads pointed to one thing: they were screwed. Ava opened a fresh Proton Mail account under a name she hadn't used since high school, Cassandra Doom 84. In the message field, she typed slowly, surgically, "To whom it may concern. I'm a former compliance analyst from Redacted Corp. I am submitting documentation related to falsified post-merger valuations, ghost vendor payments, and falsified consulting expenses, likely in violation of federal disclosure regulations. The material submitted supports suspected financial misconduct and potential SEC violations." She attached 3 PDFs. Not all of them, just enough to bait the hook. enough to open the gates. She hit send. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like pulling a pin from a grenade and setting it gently on someone's pillow. She closed her laptop, unplugged the drive, placed it back in the drawer and covered it with a pair of faded sweatpants. Then she made herself tea with shaking hands. Chamomile. Didn't even like it. But she sat in the kitchen, sipping it, listening to the rain slap against the glass. Imagined what Shane would look like when someone knocked on his office door and said, "You might want to lawyer up." She didn't smile, not yet. But something deep inside her, quiet and coiled and patient, finally exhaled. Let the war begin. 12 days after she sent the tip, the company's quarterly earnings call, scheduled and hyped for weeks, was abruptly postponed. Not rescheduled, not delayed. Just canceled. Press release was a masterpiece of corporate vagueness. Due to unforeseen operational disruptions, we are postponing the Q4 earnings report. We remain committed to transparency and will update stakeholders in due course. Ava read the headline while stirring a spoonful of instant oatmeal in her tiny kitchen. The oatmeal curdled. Her phone buzzed an hour later. Not a number she recognized, but the area code matched the company's HQ. Against better judgment, answered. The voice on the other end was low and rushed. Ava, this is Neil Feldman. We used to be in ops together. Feldman, mid-level VP. The kind of man who always looked like he was trying to remember the punchline to a joke he hadn't been invited to. He never said hello to her in the elevator. Not once in 6 years. She said nothing. He hesitated, then dropped the pretense. Look, something's coming. Big. Legals in lockdown mode. Compliance is panicking. Silence. Ava, she ended the call. 12 minutes later, she got a LinkedIn message from a former teammate in procurement. Did you talk to the SEC? They called me this morning. Said they had specific doc IDs with my name on them. What the hell is happening? The dominoes were starting to lean. By the end of the week, she counted 7 messages, texts, emails, even one panicked voicemail from Lori in HR. Lori, same HR snake who'd smiled through Ava's firing like she was signing a greeting card. Hi Ava, I know this is out of the blue, but if you have a moment, I'd love to chat. It's about some recent inquiries that have come up and well, I think it's in everyone's best interest we connect. Please call me. Ava deleted the voicemail and blocked the number. She wasn't interested in everyone's best interest. She had files older than Lori's buttocks. On day 15, startup reached out. A 2-person firm called Lumen Ethics, built around transparency tech for corporate compliance systems. Their founder, a former whistleblower himself, had read her resume, apparently forwarded quietly by a recruiter friend from Ava's past life, and requested a coffee chat. They met at a vegan cafe that smelled like wet bark. He wore jeans and apologized for cursing mid-sentence. She liked him immediately. We're not flashy, he said. We're real. We build tools that let good people call out bad ones without getting slaughtered. You look like someone who could teach us a thing or two about the system's worst corners. It wasn't a golden offer. No stock options, no glass offices, no espresso machine that used facial recognition. But it felt clean. She accepted. Started the following Monday. Her days were now filled with code reviews, onboarding calls, Slack threads that included words like consent culture and ethical audit flows. But her nights still belonged to the storm. Every evening she refreshed news alerts, tracking mentions of the company, watched forums where ex-employees swapped speculation. One night, someone anonymously posted on a finance Reddit thread, rumor, internal doc dump triggered probe. Source, an analyst they screwed over. Under it, another user replied, she's a damn hero, whoever she is. Ava didn't respond, didn't upvote, just sat there in the dark, illuminated by the pale light of her laptop, sipping burnt tea, and listening to the faint hum of revenge moving through the wires. They hadn't named her, yet, but the current was shifting. The tower was starting to sway. It started with a headline on MarketWatch that made her blood freeze mid-coffee sip, breaking, major tech firm under federal investigation for financial misconduct. No name in the title. She didn't need one. The second paragraph confirmed it, her old company, in bold. A spotlight finally angled toward the roaches. The article was cautious, hedged with alleged and sources familiar, but the bones were all there. An anonymous whistleblower, falsified merger documents, consulting payments with no receipts, SEC interest, Department of Justice observers. She read it twice, then a third time, like someone studying their own obituary. By noon, her phone was blowing up again. Coworkers turned acquaintances suddenly remembered she existed. Screenshots of internal company memos flooded her inbox, some from burner accounts, others from clearly shaken employees still deep inside the walls. One email had a subject line that just read, "You did this, didn't you?" She didn't respond. That same day, CNBC aired a segment. Somber-faced anchor read from a teleprompter, while a graphic behind her showed the company's plummeting stock. Red arrows, dramatic swoop. Then the photo, Shane smirking at a shareholder meeting from 3 quarters ago. Sources confirm subpoenas were delivered to multiple senior executives early this morning, the anchor said, lips tight like she tasted blood. Records have been seized. Internal communication logs frozen. Ava paused the video and stared at Shane's face. Looked different now, like someone who just realized the floor has teeth. The next morning, she opened her inbox to a new kind of message, clean, clinical, and calculated. From journalist at redacted. Org subject, whistleblower source verification request. Hi Ava, I believe you may be in a unique position to clarify the timeline surrounding the investigation into company. I'm not asking you to go on record. Just to help us avoid inaccuracies. Won't be named. We're confirming what's already circulating. If you're willing to talk, off the record, encrypted, we can arrange that securely. Either way, you should know your name is starting to surface. Quietly, but it's there. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she stared out her window at the skyline, steel and glass, glittering like it never lied. That afternoon, a leaked email hit Twitter. It was real. She'd seen the template before. Internal directive instructing managers to identify any low-level employees who may have been involved in non-compliant documentation workflows. Translation: find a scapegoat, feed it to the fire. One of the people named in that thread? Carmen, a junior associate Ava had mentored, fresh out of college, still printing documents single-sided because she thought it looked more professional. Ava's jaw locked. Her hand gripped the edge of the table. We're trying to drag the interns into the pit while the execs circled wagons behind NDAs and $10,000 retainers. She knew this move. She'd read the playbook. They were laying the narrative groundwork, rogue underlings, misinterpreted data, overzealous hires gone unsupervised. She opened her encrypted email draft, started typing, deleted it, typed again. The journalist wasn't the problem. The timing was. The house was only starting to burn. She wanted to wait until the fire reached the wine cellar, until the boardroom glass cracked, until Shane's name wasn't just whispered, but screamed from courthouse steps. For now, Ava watched, waited, listened. She wasn't done yet, not even close. It hit on a Tuesday morning. The number was so big it didn't even feel real at first. Ava was scrolling headlines during her train ride to the Lumen office, earbuds in, caffeine pulsing through her veins like jet fuel, and the words stopped her cold. SEC announces $187 million settlement with company name following financial misconduct investigation. The article had teeth now. No more allegedly. No more sources close to the matter. This was it. Official, public, final. The charges: accounting fraud, misrepresentation during acquisition, fabricated vendor contracts, willful obstruction of regulatory audits. Settlement: $187 million in civil penalties. Largest fine for a domestic tech firm in 5 years. Her hands trembled as she thumbed through the pages. A name wasn't mentioned, but something else was. A whistleblower complaint submitted over 3 months ago triggered a multi-agency probe, confirmed sources within the Securities and Exchange Commission. As per whistleblower statutes, the tipster may be entitled to a percentage of the fine collected, pending verification. Within an hour, Twitter was on fire. A journalist tweeted a blurred-out screenshot of internal emails she'd sent from a burner account. Someone else posted a theory thread. Remember Ava Riener, quiet analyst, vanished last quarter, fired for disloyalty? Yeah, connect the dots. By noon, #Ava Riener was trending. She turned off her phone, but the noise crept in anyway. Slack messages from new coworkers, half admiration, half holy shit you're her energy. Her boss called her into his office, sat her down and said, if you need time off, if this becomes too public, we'll back you 100%. She nodded, mute. But inside, the swirl was violent. A YouTube news clip auto-played in her feed, her former boss, Shane, doing a desperate, deer-in-headlights interview on a second-tier financial show. We had no knowledge of any misconduct, he stammered. It's possible that some junior staff misunderstood best practices. We're investigating those isolated cases now. The host raised an eyebrow. You're saying this was a bottom-up issue? Shane's smile barely covered the panic. I'm saying things may have slipped through the cracks, unintentionally. She rewound and watched again, studying his body language like a forensics expert. He was sweating through his collar. Later that night, the email came in, from a secured address ending in Gov. Sreener, thank you for your initial submission and documentation. After formal review and cross-verification with internal audit findings, your role as the initial whistleblower has been validated. Under provisions of Rule 21F of the Securities Exchange Act, your claim qualifies for award consideration. Based on the $187M penalty, your entitlement, at the maximum allowable 5% rate, equals $9.35 million. Ava sat in silence. She didn't cry, didn't gasp. She just stared at the email like it was a photograph of someone else's life. 9.35 million. The concrete she'd been carrying in her chest since the day she was fired cracked down the center. Not just the money, not even mostly the money. It was the line. The official, documented, federally stamped truth. You were right. Her finger hovered over the reply button, wanted to say something profound. But all she typed was, confirmed, thank you. Then she closed her laptop, sat back in the dark, and exhaled for the first time in months. The company had tried to erase her. Now the world wouldn't shut up about her. The money landed on a Thursday. She was sipping lukewarm coffee at her desk in the Lumen office, reviewing UI feedback for a risk reporting dashboard when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Local area code. Let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it buzzed again. Same number, then another, then a call from her bank's fraud department. She finally answered on the fourth ring. Miss Reener, the voice was tight with panic. This is Sheila from First Plains Credit Union. We have a flagged transaction here. Flagged multiple times actually. There's a deposit. It says $9,350,000 and 0 cents. Is this real? Ava looked down at her screen. The banking app sat open from earlier, still showing her usual modest checking balance. She refreshed it. The number updated, 9 digits. It didn't even feel like money. It felt like myth, like a punchline to a joke only she had lived long enough to hear. Yes, she said, voice flat. It's legitimate. You can clear the hold. Silence on the other end. Then, okay, congratulations. She hung up without another word. Around her, the office hummed on like nothing had changed. Keyboards clacking. The faint echo of a coffee grinder. Somewhere, someone was laughing about a Slack thread. She closed her laptop and stepped outside. It was autumn. The wind was sharp and the trees looked like they were on fire. She walked 2 blocks without direction, then ducked into a bookstore she'd passed a dozen times and never entered. She didn't buy anything. Just sat in the poetry section, staring at the spines until the swirl in her head quieted. She didn't feel rich. She felt like a survivor of something no one else had noticed was a war. That evening, she got an email from a name she hadn't seen since her termination meeting. From Laurie Feldman at HR Solutions NoCom subject. Just checking in. Hi Ava, I saw the news. First off, I want to say, wow, I never knew how deep things went back then. You were always very professional. I hope you understand that we were all under a lot of pressure. If possible, I'd really appreciate it if you didn't mention me publicly. I've just had a baby, and it would be a lot. Hope you're doing well. Laurie. Ava read it once, then again. Then she closed the browser tab and never replied. She wasn't petty, but she wasn't merciful either. Laurie had watched her get thrown into the corporate woodchipper with a smile and a branded pen. She could sit in the dark with the rest of them and feel the walls closing in. The next morning, Ava bought a new phone. New number, new email. She didn't move. Didn't buy a Tesla or a condo or a watch that could detect heart murmurs. Not yet. She just opened a savings account at a different bank, wired out half the funds, and sat with a financial advisor for 3 hours asking hard questions like someone who had been poor long enough to mistrust the idea of permanence. Walked out of that office with a portfolio, a password manager, and a notebook filled with scribbled priorities that started with stay invisible and ended with don't forget how they looked at you when they thought you were nothing. She felt calm, not euphoric, not victorious, just still, like the part of her that had been screaming finally ran out of breath. For the first time in months, she slept 8 hours straight and woke up knowing exactly what she'd say when they came knocking next. They didn't know she'd be there. The event was billed as a closed-door financial ethics summit. No press, no cameras, just 40 professionals in blazers and buzzwords, gathered in a Marriott ballroom that still smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and business buffet regret. The moderator stood at the podium, smiling like a man who'd been promised a tax write-off and a LinkedIn post out of it. And now, special presentation from someone who knows what it really means to speak up. She walked out without fanfare. Just a black turtleneck, dark jeans, and flats that didn't make a sound. Her name wasn't on the schedule. Half the room glanced up, annoyed, expecting a junior associate with a click-heavy slide deck. But then the first slide hit the projector. Q4 2022 Post-Merger Acquisition Report. Internal use only. The room went still. He didn't introduce herself. Not at first. Just walked them through the anatomy of a cover-up, manipulated valuations, buried consultants, a rogue intern scapegoat strategy that had been floated in a legal memo. Yes, she had it. Somewhere in the third slide, someone at the back of the room dropped a pen. It rolled down the aisle, the only sound in 200 square feet of corporate reckoning. She got to the whistleblower clause, one they'd buried in a subparagraph of the HR contract template. Read it aloud. A man in row 2 muttered Jesus Christ under his breath. Finally, she said it. My name is Ava Rianer. I was the analyst who submitted the report. I was fired for disloyalty. I now own 3 zip codes of their market cap. There was silence. Then, not applause, just heads slowly nodding. Not admiration, respect. The dangerous kind that made people adjust their job titles to include compliance adjacent. Within 48 hours, the clip leaked. Someone recorded it on their phone despite the no video rule. It hit Twitter, then Reddit, then YouTube under a title that just said, "The analyst who took down a billion-dollar lie." By week's end, the board chair of her old company resigned to spend more time with his family. A polite euphemism for avoiding subpoenas. 3 executives were indicted. 1 flipped. Shane, the man who once told her not to dig where she wasn't paid to garden, was photographed outside the federal courthouse in a crumpled suit, openly weeping after being denied bail. A reporter asked, "Anything you want to say to the whistleblower?" He didn't answer. Just stared at the pavement like it was his father's casket. Ava didn't watch it live. She was on a flight to New York, first class, window seat, lemon water untouched. A publisher had offered her a book deal. Not a memoir, she insisted, a manual. The kind that could sit on someone's shelf for years until one day it saved their whole damn life. Consulting offers followed, 5-figure speaking fees, an invite to a DOJ roundtable that included a personal escort and a seat where no one dared interrupt. But none of that was the elixir. The real reward was knowing she could walk into any room, look every fraud, flake, and finger pointer in the eye, and say what she said during her book's press conference. They called me disloyal. Turns out I was just expensive. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.